doing its thing. It's spinning, and it's looks like we are live. I don't know if that's going to have an impact on Twitch. We will find out one way or the other. Go ahead and add in the Diablo screen itself. Perfect. Excellent. Excellent. It looks like, at least from Twitch's side, y'all are still live. And I can highlight Twitch comments. Blah, 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 blah. So that's really what I was wanting. That's exactly what I was wanting. I didn't want it to mess with you guys, and I wanted it to be able to highlight the Twitch chat as well as the YouTube chat, and I have been successful in my mission statement there. So, all right. We've got a lot to talk about, so let's go ahead and dive on in. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Brian and Chris here, and today, if you're watching this as a highlight, you can actually probably go out and pre-download the closed beta for Diablo 4. Our first topic is going to be everything we want to know about the Diablo 4. You have to pre-order to get into this one. Next weekend is going to be the open beta for all. And so our main topic for the start of today's show is going to be talking about Diablo 4, the open beta focus. And then we're going to talk about some Destiny if there's time. The open beta details might end up taking the whole show. And if we don't get to our Destiny discussion, we'll be sure to follow that up for you guys here as well. But before we dive in, Chris has just completed like a massive speed run. What changed? What approach did you make to your strategy for the latest deep dungeon run that we were all kind of watching before the show went live? Because you were flying through it.
So a lot of it is just like the sheer amount of knowledge that happens. Like if you've ever watched like Llama Todd raid and he's like having a conversation and he's talking about like his favorite cereal and whether or not he played pinball as a kid, and he's in Savage on a job that he doesn't normally play, and he's not getting hit by mechanics. A lot of that is just like sheer repetition. So at this point, I've seen the 1 to 30 monsters so many times that I know exactly which all ones do. And I know which ones are problems on their own, which ones are problems when combined with other ones. So that plus having more Aether Pool. My Aether Pool's in the 30s now. So I spend the vast majority of my run synced, which means like I'm at the max power. So it doesn't really hurt that bad to pull. So I can take on 5 or 6 things at once as long as I don't get hit by mechanics. Which means that as I go, I'm kind of just anything that's in my way, I'm just kind of counting up like how many monsters I have, because I have to kill a certain number to get to the next floor anyway. So I'll pull in the first floor, in the first room, if that gets me to a chest faster, and I'll just drag that guy with me all over the level. So by the time I get to the key room, sometimes I have like 5 or 6 things chasing me, and I don't care. So like that makes it a lot faster. That I basically don't really, I kill everything in like 1 or 2 pulls, and I have no idea if that's just tank privilege. I only intend to do this on my main job, which is Warrior, which happens to be in a really good state for solo level 90 clears. Just because Warrior is God mode at self-heal and AoE pulling. So, which are the 2 skill sets most valuable in Deep Dungeon. So that's what made me faster. And then just like recognizing how to take the best advantage of each Palmander. The Palmanders this time are really fun. They're really fun. I don't know Heaven on High and Palace of that well, so maybe they're always fun. But I can tell you that Eureka Orthos is just really fun. Like the mobs have a chunky amount of life, but as soon as you get comfortable with what the different mob knowledge is, and as soon as you have a decent bank of Palmanders up, which because I tried doing some 21 to 30s yesterday to farm up Aether Pool. I'm just not there yet. So I'm doing 1 to 10s really fast, so that I have a bunch of Palmanders going into the later floors.
Excellent.
So that's where I'm at. So I've learned a lot. I'm still nowhere close to what people who are actually good at this do, but like it's amazing how much better you get, and it teaches you. It's the first piece of content that feels like it's there to teach me to not be sloppy.
Okay.
Sloppy. But it does so in a way that like it rivals something like Delibrum Regine, where like if you are sloppy, you're not hurting somebody else.
Yeah.
You're just doing your own thing. And so like I really liked Delibrum for that same reason. I felt like it encouraged me to be another player, but it didn't force me to be another player. Normal dungeons don't encourage me to be a better player, and Savage punishes me if I make a mistake, and it punishes everybody if I make a mistake. So I'm really enjoying Deep Dungeon. I think Deep Dungeon's a better rotation and like mechanic learning tool than the Stone Sky Sea Air. That doesn't mean it's good. Like, we could still go a long way as far as training tools in the game. But the fact that there's like actually mechanics messing with your rotation, and then the fact that the mechanics are easier to dodge if the pull doesn't last as long, obviously. Yeah. And so what that means is when I mess up my rotation, that now makes the pull longer. So I'm substantially more aware of when I break a combo, because I'm like, dang it, that's that much longer that this pull is going to last. So between the timer and the mechanics, I really want to be better at my rotation, at least my like 1, 2, 3s. So I like that. I think Deep Dungeon is making me a better player.
Well, that's great, dude. And congratulations on your progress so far. Chris, for those of you who don't know, he's gold to clear on the latest Deep Dungeon. And I'm gonna kind of go out on a limb and wonder if you actually have a really good time with this. Are you going to perhaps attempt the other Deep Dungeon solo clears as well?
I wasn't sure if how this one would be tuned, but I had my goal for this year. On my goals for this year, one of my bonus goals was to go and complete any of the Deep Dungeon solo, any one, because I'm playing so many MMOs, and like New World's got a huge patch on the 28th.
Dude, yeah.
10.1 looks enormous for World of Warcraft. Destiny's got a plan in front of them. Guild Wars got a plan in front of them. I predict 6.4 in Final Fantasy will be here May 23rd. I just don't know if there's time for another one. But like, I'm definitely not saying no because I don't want to do it. I'm saying no because it would just be a question of like, where does it fit in my life? Because I think a lot of it's memorization. A lot of it is looking at a monster and knowing what they do. And so I think there's a real advantage to saying like, oh, I'm not going to do one attempt every other Tuesday. It's like, no, you really want to sit down and just focus this until it's done. Because I think you really, like, as much as it doesn't have burnout. So I broke it up. Like, I did some custom deliveries earlier today. I did a little PvP today. So like occasionally I just kind of break it up between runs because it's a long time to spend in one place.
Yeah.
But I still want it to be the primary focus of what I do as far as like a gamer every day that I game until it dies.
A couple of things like from dates, because you brought up obviously like New World's patch on the 28th, which kicks off their first major update of 2023. Also coming up on March 31st, the network test for Blue Protocol goes live for that weekend. This upcoming weekend, next upcoming weekend is Diablo IV closed beta and open beta, and that has a launch of June the 6th. So like in terms of gaming and content, things are absolutely heating up. And like you and I have both completed the campaign for Destiny 2. I believe I'll be stepping in with the bear on the raid, the Nightmares raid, which came out this weekend, and looking forward to getting a clear within that. So like, yeah, it's like, it feels like just like boom, boom. We had like a little bit of a slowdown period, and now things are starting to heat up for 2023. But to jump into our first topic, because we actually have news and stuff to share, but I think this is a really great question from Paul over on YouTube. Says, what classes in D4 are you lads fancying on trying on your first go? Do you have a historical favorite, given that the classes are the same as D2? And I remember when they announced Destiny 2, you were like, no, that's not D2. There is a true and one and only D2. That would be Diablo 2 in this case. So I think I'm going to toss that question to you first, Chris. Like, stepping into D4, what's your preference on class?
I mean, you're welcome to farm up gear on whatever you want, but the correct answer is Sorceress. So, like, it's really straightforward. The single best first one is always Sorceress. So that would be my go-to in any Diablo game. In any Diablo game, I step one out of the gate. If we're basing it on kind of the traditional classes, when they start messing with it, like my favorite from a like character identity fantasy standpoint is anytime there's a shapeshifter. That's just my favorite, like, to play.
Yeah.
But Diablo, it just like meth runs. Once you've lost several hundred hours to meth runs, you just realize like Sorceress is the go-to. Like, you have to start there. and then you can build out. I don't know.
So my answer is I'm going Druid. I'm hands down going Druid, but I
Looks
love
good.
I love Barbarian. And having played the Druid, I played all of the classes that were available when we were out at BlizzCon. I am absolutely like the animations that they put
It was
into
so
Druid. It was like into that early alpha. I cannot wait to see how that's evolved. But the classes they've offered, like we said, you know, Sorceress, Necromancer being included. I think this is going to be a powerful lineup. The only thing that I felt like I like to see, because I really enjoyed the Wizard, but Sorceress is obviously going to play kind of that magic role. I feel like D4 is the best class offering. Obviously, a little bias coming from D2, but is the best class offering because D3, I was like, there's a couple classes in there that I wasn't really kind of my cup of tea. I don't think there is a class that they have here that isn't something that I'm excited to jump into and play. So at its core, there's, I think, going to be an interesting case study that is going to be happening right now with Diablo 4. Namely, it's a lot of changes, and you're coming off of all these changes, as well as the bad taste in people's mouth about the Diablo Immortal, right? So you have that aspect. You have the new seasonal model. Diablo has had seasons, which has trained a huge population in that. That is changing. We're going battle pass. We're doing these things now. And I think essentially it's going to be interesting to see if this is a positive change or a negative change. I can't even begin to predict because I think initially it's going to have a negative reaction. And then if the gameplay is good, then I think overall it will kind of settle into finding its own community over the period of time. But Chris, are you like where do you fall right now with all the news that we've been given on D4? How do you feel about it going into its launch? Are you a pre-order guy? Are you going to play this weekend, or are you going to wait till the open beta next weekend?
I'll wait till the open beta just because like that's where budget is right now. Like the entire world feels like they've just asked you to tighten your belt, like as groceries get more expensive, as just and like as like I bought Call of Duty in October and they wanted like $75 for it, and it just feels like just everything wants a subscription now. So it's purely a fiscal decision. I don't think I'm alone in that, and so like the entire world just feels like, okay, your income's gone up 2%, and every other expense in life's gone up 35%.
Yeah,
cool.
Yeah.
So
everybody like, oh, anti-raise. It's like,
my two friends that I know make the most. I don't know the exact number, but they make the most. Like when they mention budget squeeze in group text chains, part of me is like, sure, because like I know how much more than me they make, but the rest of me is like, if they can feel it, then this must just be a unanimous, like people don't want to talk about it, but like budget fatigue is real. So like,
well, and so is the
beta.
subscription fatigue, yeah.
I don't want to buy a game that's not going to be good. And so knowing there's going to be an open beta, that's like, if you know, okay, I can only afford to buy so many games in the next, like the fact that there's going to be an open beta, I think is really good.
Yes, agreed.
Now, is the open beta true open, or is that the one that's tied to I have to go buy a chicken sandwich that doesn't have a bun?
I believe it's true open. Open beta begins March 24th at 9 a.m.
PDT. Double chicken sandwich without a bun, which they market as they swapped the bun for chicken, but that's not true because then there would still be a piece of chicken in the middle. So it is one piece of chicken short of being a chicken sandwich with chicken for the bun. Just mathematically, it's a double chicken sandwich, no bun. I don't know why they market it, and they market it that way, and people say it's gross. And it's like, a double hamburger hold the bun is not considered weird, but a double chicken sandwich hold the bun, be like, that's disgusting.
Oh man, I only had the only thought I had was a story about my dad, and I'm not going to share it here with you publicly because I would hate for him to be embarrassed. He always asks me if I'm telling jokes about him at the comedy club, and I say no. I'll wait till you're dead, and then I'll make jokes about you, but not while you're living. No, sir. I don't want that to ever like roll downhill. All right, let's go ahead and dive into our core topic. Chat, feel free to weigh in with any points. Like I said, we can actually highlight both the Twitch chat and the YouTube chat. Be sure to like, favorite, subscribe, share, and all that great stuff, because that's how this channel continues to ideally bring you guys some fun and awesome content going forward. So yeah, we appreciate you guys, and but on both sides. And be sure to like it over on the YouTube for the live stream. on Twitch, be sure to just be here. I think that's all they really require. First, let's kick off with the beta dates and more. This is going through the latest post from the devs. This is the guide to Diablo 4's open beta, what they're looking for, what's happening, what is their focus. This kicks off for the closed beta this coming weekend. If you're watching this on Wednesday, March the 15th, you should be able to actually go and download the client. So go do that. I'll be playing it. I'll be giving you guys my hands-on controller-driven impressions and thoughts, because the best news for me is it supports controller on PC. Like literally, like I was like, I'm going to play on console. Everybody's playing on PC. It's got cross-play, cross-save, I believe, all that, yada, yada, yada. I might have a piece of information that isn't correct. Just note that they are delivering the things, the quality of life that I have been really wanting in this game. So I'll be giving you guys those impressions. So don't feel like you got to pre-order. I will let you guys know how I feel coming out of this weekend, having pre-ordered it as well. So the open beta focus, it says during the open beta and early access weekends, players will be able to intimately explore the game. I wish I should have highlighted. They could explore the game in Diablo 4. This includes the first taste of the campaign via the prologue and the entirety of Act 1. The first zone, Fractured Peaks, is yours to navigate as you please, stampede through the rugged landscape, and cut down the demons. For the open beta and early access weekends, your character can only level up to level 25, but you're welcome to continue ripping through demons until the open beta ends. Make your mark on Sanctuary by clearing the hellish hordes from dungeons and completing intriguing quests provided by the locals and amassing powerful loot from fallen foes. Simply put, this is your opportunity to combat the might of the Burning Hells prior to our June 6th release. And with that said, the experience is not finalized, so you may encounter performance issues, outages, and some they come across things that simply just don't work. After the open beta concludes, we'll evaluate all feedback we received and we'll be making changes as needed. We'll be looking forward to your experience, the small taste of what Diablo has to offer. If you have not already pre-purchased, blah, 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 guys, you don't need to pre-order. They're not going to run out of materials. Just look at the budget. Just pay attention to what is being offered and beware of FOMO. That would be my advice. Chris, do you have any thoughts on this first segment? I'm going to let you dive into the second one, but I do have one thought I want to share with people.
I got your progress carries forward. So it's literally just play until, in my mind, it's play. If budget's tight, just play the open. You know, if you don't know for a fact you're going to play the open, make your decision. And then I think it's really just play till you've made your decision. I see some people, they'll go grind so hard on this and they don't have any energy left for when the real game comes out. So like, as soon as you know it's fun, even if that's level 10, I'm always a person that's like, okay, well then I'm done. Like, I only want to see enough movie trailers to know that I want to see the movie. After that, stop ruining things. like, you know, so the first time you get a piece of gear that's super cool, that's really fun. And I would save that for the live version as soon as I have enough information to make my decision.
The good news here is that we know with June 6th, like there is time, there is a window that you can kind of heal and rest if you do decide to overconsume. But I'm with you, like hands down, my idea is I want to go in and see how all the classes feel on a controller, because generally speaking, when it comes to this isometric ARPG style, sometimes ranged might not necessarily feel as good. Some, you know, like it's going to ebb and flow from game to game and see how they support the overall, you know, controller. So that's essentially kind of what I'm going in to test. So that way people can, you know, think about how they want to approach the game controller wise, just because that's something I like to do. But here's the thing I want to bring up as a developer. I highlighted it here on the video itself. After the open beta concludes, we'll evaluate all feedback we've received and make changes as needed. So you're starting to think now April and May, roughly speaking, that's going to be 4 to 5 sprints worth of work. That is not enough time to make sweeping changes. Set expectations to a little bit low on changes. Bug fixes are going to be their priority. Maybe a couple of balance changes based off of the telemetry data you can see. Major feedback is important. Don't hold that back. But note that major feedback is going to be a 6 to maybe an 18-month window, right? Same thing applies to Final Fantasy. Same thing applies to any games as a service game. Generally start to think about it in terms of, if you break out a calendar in terms of sprints, you can start to sit here and say, how much time do you think this would ultimately take? And so feedback, usually what a lot of gamers get frustrated on in this section is that they feel like, hey, I provided feedback and it did get in for the release. Like, what gives? Halo was the same way. I was really concerned about Halo's progression system, rightfully so.
Yeah, but now it's been a year and they still haven't.
And now it's still been a year. And so, like, I would say, like, they don't understand the feedback. So even if they're not understanding if they don't understand it, it's even worse. Like, it's going to take a lot longer for them to actually comprehend what feedback they're given. All right. Chris, why don't you take over and let's jump into the open beta details.
Okay. So early access to the open beta will be March 17th at 9 a.m. Blizzard time over there on the West Coast. And it will conclude March 20th at 12 p.m. Blizzard time. The open beta will be the following week, March 24th, the same 9 a.m. to 3 days later, 12 p.m. As open beta and early access weekends get closer, the ability to early download the game will become available. So you'll want to do that in your Blizzard launcher. We'll update this section with that information in the future.
All right. And let's go ahead and move on to the next section.
During the early access weekend, players will have access to the 3 classes. Assume the role of the battle-bred barbarian, nimble rogue, or elementally tuned sorcerer. Once the open beta weekend comes around, the earthen druid and undead wielding necromancer classes can also be played in addition to the original 3. A maximum of 10 characters can be made per battle.net account. After reaching level 25 with one character, we recommend you try repelling demonic hordes with additional classes to find your favorite. While progress will transfer from early access to open beta weekends, all characters made during these weekends will be deleted once the beta ends.
So do not murder yourself to get a head start for June the 6th. All right.
On all consoles that support Diablo IV via couch co-op, players can enlist a second Demon Slayer to combat ranks of hell screen by screen to play using couch co-op during the early access weekend. Only one player will be required to have the official access to this experience. The second player will need to have their battle.net and console-specific accounts linked. The strength of Burning Hells knows no bounds, but you can even the odds by rallying a party of demon destroyers via online 4-player co-op. To play this way during early access weekend, all players, excluding those via couch co-op, will be required to have official access to this experience. Note that vanquishing demons while near any player will grant you a 5% bonus experience and 10% if you are near a party member of your party. Discover Fractured Peaks. Fractured Peaks is home to craggy steps and snow-laden pathways, creating an unforgiving landscape rife with demons to slay and secrets to discover. This is where your Wanderer's legend is forged. After completing the prologue, the Fractured Plains will be yours to explore as you wish. There's much to experience even in this small slice of Sanctuary, so we wanted to call out a few special activities of interest. Nestled among the mountains is the city of Kjovashad.
Good job.
That was a lot of letters. And a safe zone where you can repair, purchase new gear, upgrade your health potion, access the stash, and much more. Think of the city as your base of operations between excursions into the rigid expanse of the zone. The main quest line of Diablo IV is rich and consists of multiple acts. Look for the main quest line markers on your map to begin your pursuit of Lilith. Additionally, there are numerous side quests to embark upon throughout Fractured Peaks during your travels. If you find yourself slashing demons near the town of Nevesk, check out the Woodsman of Nevesk side quest and one of the nearby altars of Lilith, created by Lilith's first children. These altars are spread throughout Sanctuary. Finding them provides a permanent boost to core stats to all characters on the Eternal Realm. While trudging through the snow, you may come across World and Legion events. World events are small experiences that arise at random within a zone and may require you to do things such as escorting a lost soul to its loved one or satiate the hunger of bloodthirsty obelisks. World events can usually be completed within a couple of minutes and are completely optional, but they always provide a reward for your heroics. There are many world events for you to discover during the open beta. Try completing them with other players too. In contrast, Legion events are longer experiences meant to challenge you. Ensure you're prepared to overcome hordes of demons before entering them, and if you're able, take them on with the aid of other players. These events will usually be marked on your map, but are sometimes revealed after conquering a stronghold. With risk comes reward. After completing a Legion event, you'll be rewarded handsomely for prevailing. These events are optional and can be completed more than once. Dungeons are a cornerstone of the Diablo universe. Diablo IV and this open beta has no shortage of them to explore. Dungeons and their recommended level to complete are displayed on your map. These are tight, tense instances where determination and skill will guide you to victory over whatever hell you discover within. Dungeons are a great place to put your skills to the test while also racking up useful gear for even more threatening encounters, such as world bosses. Combat massive world bosses. Daring wanderers seeking a sizable challenge should look no further. Ashava, a whirlwind of pestilence, has recently emerged in Fractal Peaks. Journal entries recounting sightings of this gargantuan plague bearer. It looks like the same one we fought at BlizzCon.
Yeah, it looks very similar. Yeah.
Plague bearer make note of her 2 massive forearm blades and the ability to coat the ground in a viscous poison. Her blades, which can cleanly cut through stone and flesh alike, are to be feared. Records appear to mention a way to weaken Ashava, but unfortunately that portion of the page is corroded away. It is thought that one wanderer alone cannot bring this beast to its knees. Come prepared for an intense fight and recruit your friends and other players to pursue the ultimate glory of conquering one of the burning hell's most heinous creatures to date. Should you find a pathway to victory, a sizable loot drop awaits. Here's what you'll have the opportunity to combat Ashava during the open beta and early access weekends. And they have scheduled it at 10 a.m., 12 p.m., 10 p.m. and midnight on the 18th and on the 25th PDT to really encourage people to all be there. I'm sure the servers will love it. Very cool.
Yeah. And I want to highlight a comment kind of as a breakout of that information. So guys, be sure to, honestly just keep these comments coming because this is what makes things interesting. Wargiver says, between the disastrous launch of D3 and the history of WoW expansions going in directions that I didn't like, and the FOMO infesting all Blizzard games, I'm opting not to spend $90 Canadian, I assume, plus tax on the standard edit of this game. Chris, do you feel like Diablo 3, do you remember the launch of Diablo 3?
If it weren't for the player auction house, I largely have fond memories. Mm-hmm. It was very frustrating that the only gear people were selling on the board was trash because everybody was selling it for real money, and that the people that were willing to spend real money were coming out ahead. Mm-hmm. So there were elements of that were very frustrating, but on its own, I think it was a decent out of the gate launch if it were not for that one enormous blunder, as best I can remember. But what the game has done since then is a drastic overhaul. Diablo 3 today really doesn't look a whole lot like it did at launch. Beyond just a glance, like it feels different. Yeah. It really matured. Diablo 2, however, I remember fond memories from the get-go for as long as I played, and they have brought it back in its reforged, remastered, re-edited, whatever, and that has proven to be an incredible level of support for a very old game. So Diablo 3 is just still no Diablo 2. So I have a lot of questions about what are they modeling this after, and to what effect will any success that Diablo Immortal is considered to have internally have on this game? If Diablo Immortal has turned out to be a cash cow for the effort, will that have an effect on this game? So I absolutely understand not wanting to buy a standard edition until you, much less a fancier edition, until you're sure that this game is for you. Now, if you're somebody who just plays action RPGs, you play Path of Exile, you play Wolcen, you play this, these are the types of games you play. There does end up being some genres of games, RTSs, like city simulators, like SimCity, and action RPGs, where the genre is still just, you're not getting a launch every month. So you kind of end up in a position where you kind of have to buy all of them, whether you like them or not, just because that's the only rate at which you get variety. But for anybody that's happy with other genres of games, you can wait. So I would wait and see how they handle it, especially if you feel they've had issues in the past. I personally think WoW launches are generally good experiences. I enjoyed BFA and Shadowlands on launch.
Yeah.
So I feel a little bit differently about Blizzard products, and so my actions might differ. But I think it's a valid feeling. Like, I understand how people got to that conclusion and why they would say, based on that, I don't really want to give them money yet, or maybe at all.
Yeah, and with Diablo 3, like for PC, that was the first, like, it required online, and that was a frustration for people who were used to being able to kind of hack the game. And
I just don't even remember it.
Well, because the only reason a lot of people remember it is because they're trying to get in, couldn't log in, and that's generally like whenever there's an online game, and Diablo 4 is going to be online, but like most of the games ultimately are like requiring that internet connection. The console versions didn't, so they didn't run into that same issue. But you brought up Wolcen, also like last
I wasn't
Epoch.
even married yet.
Yeah, also
this was a while ago, guys.
This was a while. This was a long time. The last Epoch, that's another action they just had they're not yet to the full release, but like they're adding in things, and so there is a collection of those. So buyer beware. Like, there's always a good value in waiting and seeing how things are received, because beyond action RPGs, like, we know there's also a lot of other things happening and going on, as you'll get like Final Fantasy 14, the 6.4 patch roughly around this time, if not a little bit sooner. You'll have Blue Protocol, the Throne of Liberty, like a lot of like games and things like that heating up to pick up, and we'll get hyped too. So if you're somebody who's like, oh, this is what everybody's talking about, I want to go play it, like if you wait and save money, who knows, the Activision Blizzard deal could close, and if you have Game Pass, it could be included then. So that's going to be something interesting to see for sure. Now, let's go ahead and jump into the second section. Play the open beta, lead the pack, it says. It wouldn't be a trip to Sanctuary without earning a cache of unique rewards along the way. As you play Diablo 4 during the open beta and early access weekend, showcase your wondrous prowess by collecting all 3 open beta rewards. Players who unlock these rewards will receive them once Diablo 4 launches. The initial casualty title, earned by reaching Kovashad with 1 character. Early Voyager, earned by reaching level 20 on 1 character. Beta Wolfpack cosmetic item, earned by reaching level 20 on 1 character. I guess
that's the dog in the back.
Yeah, but I'm just making that says the same thing, right?
Just napping until go day.
Is that the same requirement? I'm not misreading that. It's like, all right, cool. So a title, and then getting level
title
20
cosmetic for
there
20.
You go. Perfect. So there is the incentive that they're trying to add to get more people to test. I think that's smart, and the fact that it's animated, I think, is really cool. We'll have to see how that plays out.
Super cute.
Now, yeah, and then for system
that's
specs,
what I think about grungy Diablo. Cute. It lacks cute things.
Cute things. The hope is that because Xbox is committed that with the Activision Blizzard deal, they will bring their games to GeForce Now, which is something I have been wanting. more games on that service. Open beta PC specs, though. Minimum requirements, 64-bit Windows 10, processor i5 or AMD FX 8100, 8 gigs of memory, GTX 660 or an AMD Radeon R9, DirectX 12, and 45 gigs recommended SSD, and obviously broadband connection. For the recommended, you're looking here at an i5 or an R3, 16 gigs of RAM, GTX 970 or higher, or like a Radeon RX 470. And then again, the SSD is still the same. For a note for that, Xbox Live Gold or PlayStation Plus subscription will not be required to play Diablo 4 during the open beta and early access. In Germany, PlayStation Plus subscription will be required due to the ratings requirement. Once Diablo 4 launches, Xbox Live Gold and PlayStation Plus will be required to access some of the game's multiplayer features. So that's all the Diablo news that we have for you guys right now. Chris, do you have any other thoughts before we shift into our second main topic for today's live show?
No, I'm excited to have new games coming out. I think one of the biggest signs of a healthy industry is that we are seeing games regularly release, and it feels like there's times that that's our best indicator of what's coming out, right? If it's a bunch of junk that's coming out, that tells us something. If it's a bunch of good games coming out, that tells us something. But like, these are our chance to measure, because the ultimate measure of a gaming studio is what they publish. I know that like there are a lot of valid things around like ethics and around monetization and all these other things that ultimately, if they can't do their very core product well, none of it matters. It does, like, nobody is out there supporting bad games just because they're nice people. Like, if you can't make a good game, none of it matters.
Yeah,
so
that's the be all end all.
What's coming out of the Diablo franchise? I think Diablo Immortal rightfully frustrated a lot of fans of the IP. And in the space, the action RPG space, there aren't that many names. So when one of the big ones mishandles their IP, it's incredibly frustrating.
Yeah. All right, let's shift into our second topic. Thanks, everybody. Hopefully you enjoyed the Diablo topic. We're going to be talking about Destiny 2's state of the game, difficulty of the main content. I was asking Chris, what do you want to talk about, especially related to Destiny? I was able to finish the Legendary campaign this weekend as a part of my community game day that we run over on Twitch once a month. The April date will be announced soon, and hopefully I'll be able to step into the raid. I was able to play with the bear and had a really good time with that. But to Chris, in this case, were you able to finish on Legendary? Where were you at with the campaign? How did you feel about its difficulty?
I did finish because I had other goals and I wanted to finish by a certain date. I went ahead and climbed under some stairs to beat the last boss.
Yeah.
Like all heroes do.
All winners.
The true guardian. So I did climb under some stairs to get that final kill. Little odd that level of cheese is possible. That felt particularly cheesy, and it felt like an easy thing to patch out if they don't want it. If that bothers them as devs, it feels like a really easy thing. Just remove the pipe or put a little wire there that blocks me, or allow the grenade to pass through stairs. Like, it just felt really goofy. But I was enjoying. I played with a friend and playing with Chris the Mod, and some of the bosses I actually felt that 2-player made it harder. But ultimately, the universal feeling across all of it, whether I was in missions or I was in bosses, whether it killed me 40 times or I one-shotted it, ultimately, all I could think the entire time through the Destiny Legendary campaign is, why did I just go through Dragonflight? Why a year ago did I go through Endwalker? Why did I go through End of Dragons in Guild Wars? Why did I go through New World and not have this option? Why do MMOs, and I don't think they're the only one, I think some people have named some other MMOs that have high difficulties, but why is it not the standard to offer me a higher difficulty, especially in these games that do seem to want to encourage you to replay? Things like New Game Plus, all the different achievements within Guild Wars, to just right out of the gate, just say, you know what, like, yes, it would be harder to kill it on normal and not, like, let any of the villagers die that are trying to escape the village or whatever the quest may be. But, like, why is there not just let's just take this up to our kind of low-level raid difficulty right out of the gate, especially in games where the narrative is meant to make you feel like really immersed. The solo challenges in Final Fantasy XIV, basically from Stormblood on, are incredibly like representative of the story. But if you're really good at the game, it starts to feel really goofy that the big bad, and you duke it out and you're in a fist fight and you're like, and I beat him. Whoa. And it's like, I would love to feel like, oh my gosh, that was like, I can't believe my Warrior of Light triumphed over that. And to have like an extreme difficulty, since that's a Final Fantasy word, like, that's what Destiny 2 Legendary made me want.
Yes. I actually really agree and echo that, because it actually makes the campaign feel like at least the stakes somewhat matter. And from a player's perspective, having played the game, having a lot of options, I've said this multiple times. When a game finally pushes back on you, do I, as a player, go and actually explore the systems that are offered? And until the game actually pushes, on you as a player, you're like, yeah, I got it done. I got the win. Okay, like, and that's where, when I see games like, I guess Final Fantasy XIV is a good example of this. When Stormblood dropped, the vast majority of the game was like, yeah, you're playing it, you're having a good time, and then you finally get to the boss of the main, Stormblood story, and you saw generally, like, online, like, whoa, like, it felt like people just all of a sudden got punched in the gut. The positive side of that is it does make that boss memorable, and it did for a while, because it took a lot of people a lot of time to get through that boss, and then Gear was able to kind of ease that difficulty somewhat. But it wasn't that it was just the hard fight. It was that in contrast to the difficulty of overall, you end up hitting that wall. And to add in a higher level difficulty per the tier, as long as it's
just like the
optional for the
lower
player.
ones.
Yeah, just
the
like the lower
basis
ones.
is normal. We have the ability to scale it down. I'm just asking to go the opposite direction.
Yes. And I would fully support that. In fact, actually, I've often wondered, and a lot of players, like Final Fantasy XI vets, we've often wondered, like, would it be possible for them to spin up like a dedicated server that had that rule where you could sit here and say, like, going out into the open world mobs are dangerous, and so you want to have that experience to where the world is pushing on you, and making that its own rule set so that it literally isn't going to say, okay, yeah, we get that you want to be able to play the game and have time, and we're going to give this as an option to see, honestly, if people put up or shut up. Because at its core, I would love to know what the stats are. And clearly from the Witch Queen into the Legendary campaign, I think systematically has been highly praised for its difficulty and its challenge and the benefits that it gives you, because like you can finish the Legendary campaign and all of a sudden it's like, we're going to go ahead and just boost up your item score.
Also,
So we're going to reduce your grind.
Anytime.
Yeah, you're not like
you could drop out for individual fights and jump back up. There is an achievement tied to having completed all of the missions once, but like in a Final Fantasy term, if there was a particular, single player solo instance that you found gatey, you could say, you know what, I'm just gonna skip that one for now, and then I'll come back to finish that out because the achievement will have, here's your 10 parts, and I'll just be missing that one. So you can come back.
Yeah.
It taught me to go engage in substats.
It gives you that ability in Destiny. Like, how would you think it would work for Final Fantasy XIV's like fight? Because that fight is being queued up by multiple people, and Earth Demon, puts it like straightforward. The MSQ needs to be clearable by every job. That's the design philosophy of bring the player, not the job, as vice versa, bring the job, not the player. And when it came down to a multiplayer fight, like, is that, they have other difficulties, the extremes and savages, but for the MSQ, allowing the player to opt into that, how do you think that would translate?
I think the open world portion would have to be these breathers. I found them easier in Destiny as well. So I think in WoW or 14, the open world portions, you'd have to just leave it unless you're going to start moving to like a Diablo Hell type system where you can queue onto these other servers where the world is just scarier. But what you would end up with is the Criterion Savage Mythic type system being the basis of the dungeon. If the dungeon is built into the campaign of that game, like it is in Final Fantasy, and your solos would be at that difficulty. So your solos would be scaled up at least a little bit. And some may be harder for some classes than others. And that kind of is what it is. And like, obviously in a perfect world, you want everything balanced, but you just do your best and ship it. It's an optional difficulty. So do your best. Balance is available. And so it may get patched over the early patches and say, you know what, we kind of missed the mark on this. This one could have been a little harder. This one could have been a little easier. But I think that the solo fights and then the group fights, the variant Criterion system, Unreals, things like that, where they've started to say, hey, we can revisit this, having extreme versions of the dungeons, because the dungeons in Final Fantasy, the normal dungeons in World of Warcraft, they are designed for somebody who has maybe never played an MMO or really isn't comfortable in an MMO. And what that means is to people with 10 years of experience who've maybe done anything at the raid level or the savage level, or they've spent any time watching guides, getting to know their classes, they likely find on launch those first normal dungeons in either game to be very, very, very easy because it has to be clearable. And so we have to lower it down to the degree of somebody there. So I think you're adding an optional difficulty. So when you get to that dungeon, it immediately says, do you want to clear this on normal? Do you want to clear this on extreme? And it's like, no, I want to go straight into the extreme. That's what I want, because when the cutscene plays and it's like, oh my gosh, we beat the boss, I don't want that to be that. Like some of the dungeons during my Endwalker playthrough, my whole party went down and I, as the tank, finished the boss by myself on my first clear. So we get to the end, and if like an NPC says like, wow, I can't believe you and your team triumphed, like all I can think is, what team? Like my team died, and they're like, that's amazing you did that. I'm like, is it? I just didn't get hit by anything. And so it kind of breaks the immersion a little bit, as opposed to like, you're right, that is amazing. Like we worked hard together to overcome that. But as an optional thing, optional. It would need to be very, very optional. And at that point, you have to start to ask in a game, how strong is your Trinity? In Destiny, it's not. In Guild Wars, it's not. In New World, it's not. But in Final Fantasy, would it be better if we started to talk about like, okay, do we have an open world trust system? When an NPC follows you on a quest, instead of just following you and talking to you at these circles, do they fight with you? So that people at certain classes, so that a black mage has a chance to back up a little, so that a healer has a chance to have some damage outgoing. At that point, that starts to be a totally different game.
Yeah.
And the advantages of that are, if you're a healer, it's really weird that in some of these really strict Trinity games, you make it all the way to cap before you ever really learn how to heal, because the whole way up, you were just single target DPSing.
Yeah.
It starts to open a whole bunch of questions. Like on its base, you're like, oh, it'd be cool to have higher difficulty. But you're right. It triggers all of these what if.
I think it works well in Destiny for the fact it has drop in, drop out multiplayer. The worlds are self-balanced, because like Wargiver, even, Pride Izzy talking about like Wargiver saying, I don't think the Diablo style difficulty would actually fit 14 unless you're thinking about making a party required like Final Fantasy XI style. And that might actually be interesting. I think if you're going to translate that system into the world of Final Fantasy 14 or any other MMORPG, that's where you're spinning up a server, and that server then has those rule sets. So everybody on that server has already pre-agreed that we're going to, fight together.
Solo instances.
They have it to scale it down if you can't clear the normal setup.
But they know how to scale for roles.
They do. I'm saying that in terms of the general rule and how, like, you start to think about all the what ifs. It works in Destiny with drop in, drop out multiplayer. It could work in Final Fantasy 14 with that same kind of rule set. But the challenge that 14 has that Destiny doesn't is that solo fight is a solo fight. Destiny is solo, duo, trio. It has that scale and ability in those fights already. I would love and advocated that those fights have that same feature, especially with like, then you want to scale it up in terms of difficulty. Heck to the yes, those could be some really cool and memorable fights that you and your friends share that together. The weirdest part about it is that it's that inconsistency, which is weird. I've hit Destiny on its inconsistency too, like where it's like, here's a 3-man party, here's a 4-man party, here's a 6, like, and they used to have like even more wild and crazy combinations, but it's that drop in, drop out, that ease of access to be able to jump in and do it multiplayer or do it solo to challenge those various things. So exactly what you're actually doing with Deep Dungeon right now, you're scaling your own difficulty and experience to the grind that you want to put into it. And I'm all for that. All for player choice, all for player options. And so why would, could multiple games do that? I hope they do. I hope whatever's, is looking at and saying, hey, we're going to build this in, and then you can challenge it. I hope Diablo 4 adds that, they have the, they've always had their like difficulty scaling, but that's also part of their progression. I'd love to see how they've put it into Destiny where you are kind of capped. So the game is pushing on you, which kind of really forces you to think your build through. Elden Ring is a classic example as well. So the question ends up being is that, do players really want it, or do they think they want it? And the think you do but you don't always kind of keeps coming up, and sometimes it's true, sometimes it's right. But I for one would love to see them at least try.
It's something that once you've tasted it, I really want it in other games. It's hard to decide what it looks like. In Final Fantasy, what does that do when you're playing as another character? There are times you play as another character.
Yeah.
Do we move from their little limited rotation up to like a full PvP rotation? Do we move up to the full, you should know the class? If that character is a samurai, you're just going to play as a samurai, and that's how we balanced it. And so get to know samurai or drop it to normal. I don't know what to tell you. How unforgiving do we want it to be? What's the reward for doing it? Is there a reward at all? In my mind, it's something very simple, probably a title for clearing all of it. Probably very, 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 very light, because you don't want it to feel mandatory. So I think the fact that there was gear tied behind it in Destiny encouraged me to cheese that final fight. And, if there hadn't been a reward, I would have said, I'll drop it to normal, finish the campaign. I'll come back and fight it on that when I have more time. But because there was a reward, it's like, well, I'm willing to cheese to get to the reward because I've made it this far. I want that 1770. So I don't know exactly what it works. I don't know exactly how it works. I just know that having the game be face roll easy doesn't feel like, well, it'd be hard to make it not face roll easy, so let's just not try. That doesn't feel like the right answer.
Yeah, I agree. And it comes down to, I think, our feedback as players and then showing up when content does do these kind of things, right? And I think and hope that with Destiny in a way leading that pack, that we can continue to see that more and more being brought in, into it. So that's, I think, like I like it. I like that challenge, and I like that people have responded well to it, and it makes me really want that in something like Final Fantasy 14, where I mean, I've wanted that the whole time. I wanted that when you step out in the open world, like it's balanced so that, yeah, oh, you want to play a black mage? You better bring a tank and a healer. Like it's like you want to bring that party to go step out into the world. Otherwise, the world will punch you. But having that in its own protected way, because I think the it's a small section of the player base that would actually be interested in that. I'd
Oh, it
love
would
to
be
be
the
proven.
perfect 0.1 too, right? You release the game as 0.0, and then we release it on Extreme version 2 weeks later.
Yeah.
And so that gives that replayability, because that replayability is really hard. So if you want to guarantee that day one, we're just trying to protect the instant server clog, we're just trying to get it working, we don't want to worry about balance, and then 2 weeks later, we're going to release this thing, and it's optional. Like most people have already cleared the campaign anyway. That'd be fine. And so like I understand there's 1,000 reasons this wouldn't work, but to say, well, then let's just not do it, that's not how we ended up with trusts. That's not how we ended up with the escort type stuff that we got in Endwalker. That's not how we ended up with the easier versions and the ability to do the difficulty down. That was not always a thing. Like just because something would cause some problems and would be hard doesn't immediately mean no. And what I can tell you is that the downside of getting a system like this is, as beautiful as it is in Destiny 2, it's not universal. So when I had to go do some stuff from Witch Queen to unlock something, and I went out into the open world, that stuff didn't have the ability to scale up like a Diablo Hell type system. I didn't have so then it felt really weird to go from legendary campaign down to normal world scale to 1600. And you're like, wow, this is kind of like, I feel like I'm just punching children. Like this doesn't even feel fun. And so it would be, I don't know. It could be something that comes back. I think New Game Plus as a system, the fact that it doesn't offer experience, it doesn't come in a higher difficulty, it doesn't offer rewards, it doesn't have titles, it doesn't at this point, this is just one more thing that New Game Plus could do. Pick one. Just pick one. The fact that New Game Plus does nothing except allow you to go back through the story, and only from these limited on-ramps. You can't just pick your quest. Some of these chapters of New Game Plus are like 10 plus hours. So if you have a favorite spot, it could be a huge amount of work to go re-experience it. So like, I'm really just saying, like, do something for New Game Plus. And Destiny 2 has shown me yet one more thing. Here's one more thing you could consider. I don't care which one you do. If it's a way of leveling alternate jobs, that's fine. If it's a way of farming up poetics, that's fine. Like, any one. Pick one.
Now, Earth Demon says Destiny isn't peer-to-peer, so it's not server-based, so server resources aren't an issue. MMOs can't be. And that's not 100% true. Destiny has parts of it that are peer-to-peer, and then they do have dedicated servers that are managing certain things, that drop-in, drop-out multiplayer. What's going to be a really interesting case study in this case, especially to that viewpoint, is Blue Protocol isn't server-based. It's that drop in, drop out, like it's going to handle it in the back end. We do believe that it will be region based, so you will pick your region in which that you're playing, but if it can actually handle all of it behind the scenes, we'll actually see an MMO that is that drop in, drop out multiplayer where the game just handles it all behind the scenes. And when that happens, then I think you get the option to be able to do a lot of different things, and we're already seeing difficulties being added into Blue Protocol. And again, I'll be going hands-on with that on at the end of this month, and we'll be able to give you guys more details about all of that, especially as it relates to that. So Blue Protocol is going to be an interesting case study, because it sounds like from what they've shared that it might have that similar kind of feel. So hey, just play, and we're going to handle the matching and your friends and all of that, which I think is the future of how these games are going to function. I'm going to turn this topic off. We have a topic from chat, which we'll use to conclude today's show. Whitney says, unrelated to the topic at hand, but it's been making me think about when 14 does eventually sunset, what are you looking for if there is a new Final Fantasy MMO out there in terms of its combat systems? I'm going to let Chris handle the first take on this one.
I think Final Fantasy XIV's done a really great job with a couple of things. First of all, they've allowed us to run content that is, at this point, like a decade old. And so, whatever system you pick, it needs to be flexible enough that you can continue to manipulate it without undoing old work. So, right from the get go, like a base system like that um, requires a fair bit of planning to make sure, like, what if we ever want to add abilities? What happens if we remove abilities? There were a lot of design decisions that were made back in the 2012, 2013 era that still limit what they can do today because they don't want to break things. So right from the get-go, like future proofing a system is something that, like, how do you add classes? Whatever the rules are, they need to be broad enough but consistent enough that ideally those can stay in play. Because when you make these big movements, like the tank stance change, those actually feel really odd. And there are moments that feel really odd within Final Fantasy XIV's combat history. And they were just a natural progression of, like, we just don't want to be bound by decisions of 10 years ago. And I get that, but it just, like, they don't feel good at the time. I still don't think they feel good, like, compared to where it was. It lost something. So I don't really worry about it that much. I personally think the combat system they have is a fairly decent baseline. Obviously, you just put in new classes, new abilities as it sits. I would want more of the focus to be on what can they do to add more variety within gearing. I think gearing is very, very, very flat in 14. And so without overdoing it, I think there's a fair bit of, like, on the spectrum of gearing simplicity, Final Fantasy XIV is all the way on the simple end. So, like, just something that adds a little bit of variety to the way gearing works. By the time you factor for weekly lockouts and stuff like that, I think gearing is a fairly large friction point that we just kind of live with at this point.
Yeah, I talked about, actually, I decided to make a video because I was talking with like Zane Leinhardt on Twitter about it, because you even confirmed, like, they've added in perks as a part of the crafting, system, which is exciting. And then imagine if they can extrapolate that to where you could end up having all these different, pathways to gear and options to the player, because you could still keep BIS locked behind the hardest content, but then you could actually even out the power scale, because then perks could kind of make up the difference. So that video probably is going to roll out tomorrow, just generally speaking, because I agree with you on that. I do think, though, from the kind of the hit this in terms of its combat system, I think gearing is an absolute must. They need to really kind of think about that as, the long term. The reason why it's simplified, it has two values: to get new players in and to have players return, so that curve isn't as difficult. But there's other ways they could go about addressing that. I think, honestly, if they're going to make another, MMORPG, you don't want it to feel like 11. You don't want it to feel like 14. You want to have a whole nother offering. So a player who's playing 14 isn't like, I'm just doing the same thing over here. Like, why am I doing that now? I think you would go action combat, action MMO is where they would go with it if they were going to release another one. And I still think that that's actually, development wise, if they haven't started, they're probably going to wait to start that, so that from all the technology that is being implemented, they can take the best in the premiere. They can let a lot of people kind of roll out with Unreal Engine 5 and work out any problems within the development cycle, and then be able to adopt a lot of that and bring that to market. Same thing with AI technology, same thing with, cloud technology. We've seen Square Enix at its current pace struggle with servers. And so I think that there is actually so many things going on behind the scenes that it would give us all headaches if we were involved in all these conversations. But with a potential Sony acquisition, with a potential, like, what would be the network architecture behind the scenes to be able to offer, and with competition being able to step into it, that Blue Protocol's doing these things, that this game's doing these things, etc., they can kind of, ideally take an approach to say, yeah, 14's our main thing, and then over the course of this next 10-year plan, working and planning out and deciding what to do, so that, like, at some point, like maybe 5 years into it, they can sit here and say, hey, here's our new action, MMORPG. And I think that it would have to be different enough so that it doesn't necessarily step on its toes. So for players who really like the tab targeting, etc., they say, we have that product for you. It's called Final Fantasy 14. For players who wanted something like an action MMO, which is where the MMOs are going right now. At least there's more and more of those. New World, Blue Protocol, two highlights. Destiny, in a way, like even though it is peer to peer, we'll see what they decide to do in the long run. It's going to be something where I think that would give. I think it has to be different enough. Otherwise, you end up just running the risk of saying like, you gave me a new game, but it feels a lot like what you already have and what I already invested my time into. What do you think?
I mean, I think there's ways besides just the combat system to make it feel distinctly different. If you change the storytelling method, this would feel like a drastically different game. If you change the way the classes interact, if you have the ability to move to like a subclass system, that's something that just breaks Final Fantasy XIV. You can't just suddenly introduce that. It would break all the old ultimates. It would break, it would just destroy things. But if you design a game with that on the front end, you change the gearing system. Like Final Fantasy XIV works very well for its community because it's a very easy game to take breaks from. It's very easy to get into. And so like it's, there's a lot about its gearing system that acts as a strength, even though those of us who've been around a long time can see that those strengths come at a cost. All strengths do. So like, I think there's plenty, even within a tab target basis, that could make it feel distinctly different enough. If it was more open world based, Final Fantasy XIV, if you're not hunting or gathering, the open world is very limited in what it offers you. You could move to being a much more open world based game that would change it. Final Fantasy XIV Crystalline Conflict has shown that this player base can tolerate and even enjoy PvP, but
and then how those jobs
if
feel
the world is grittier as a whole,
right? And how those jobs though also feel way more like it feels like they have way more identity in that restrictive set than opposed to having like all these different things where they're all like, it's like, but that also means the combat in and of itself has changed too. So you're right, like you could imagine them taking the Crystalline Conflict battle system and that's, hey, here's our new MMO, right? Like the jobs are going to feel really cool. And then you modify them with perks and gear and things like that so that it gives you all these different avenues and build variety. I think that could be something very exciting. I'd be all about that. But here's the theory I'd like to throw. This is total conspiracy theory, internet. Final Fantasy 16 battle system, absolutely well received. What if they decided to say 16 is going to lead in from a narrative perspective and set up a world that now is an MMO?
I mean, I think it's a conspiracy for a while because even if it was true, you're talking about a 2030 game. You're talking about a 2032 game. Like I'm thinking that. So, by that time you come back and clip this and it's like, that's so weird. What's wrong with your filter that you both have colored hair? Like this is going to be so far down the line.
Back in my day
that, it just, we'd be turning the channel over to your kids. Like it would just be so far in the future. So yeah, I mean, it's a valid enough theory if it's well received, but I think we would see a lot of iterations along the way before we got to that. I think we would see a lot of steps along the way that made that feel like a logical conclusion. I don't think it would be Final Fantasy 16 releases and then they start on an MMO and then they release the MMO. I think there's other things in between there that act as good milestones to say, hey, is this really the path we want to go? Because it's an expensive and long road to go down. And I think we'd want to check in a couple of times before we've committed to something that big.
Oh yeah. I'm not saying that it would be small because even chat saying like, it's built off of the developer that Yoshi P recruited. I'm going to butcher the name, Ratoya. So it's like being able to bring him in and have him with the 16. However, that works there, like he's been there. He wasn't there for a day to do this, like he's a part of the team in and of itself. Also, what's interesting, and the only reason why I think it would be kind of wild to see if that ended up happening is they were making a Final Fantasy 15 MMO. Apparently for mobile, and they announced that, and who knows, we just started seeing information about symbiogenesis. So the NFT Square Enix anger frustration train is gearing up, baby. So if people were frustrated at 14 right now, just know you're going to see some people making some interesting connections and whatnot. So just if you guys are frustrated with negative content on the internet, just as a warning, note that that's probably going to be something you're going to see in your feed here in the near future. So just train your brain for it, so then what terms to avoid and watch out for.
I think that is the other thing to hit on is if we get another MMO, even if it was an identical combat system, it would feel inherently differently if it was built on a free-to-play model.
Yeah,
it would feel inherently different if it was built around, less of a less of a MSQ type storytelling method. If it was smaller stories told in chapters, it could still be narrative based, but was not so focused on a single main story with really little to no player agency. We're all on kind of the same rails, finishing. All of us are watching a television show play out, and the television show ends the same no matter what your actions are.
Yeah.
So, like, you know, there's different directions they could take, even without focusing on combat system. So if the combat system ended up being a literal copy paste from Final Fantasy XIV, there's still a lot of rooms to justify why it would be a different game and not just a new expansion for this one.
Yeah. And chat's asking why 15 MMO. I mean, honestly, it's up to them. I think the world that they set up, one of the things I enjoyed actually about Comrades is I wish it was like, I was like, I really enjoy playing in this world from a multiplayer perspective. So maybe that's essentially kind of what they're thinking. But we saw Wargiver talk about, you know, would they actually, do you think they would actually just do a, like the next MMO as a continuation with a big skip like 14.2 for example?
A lot of that comes down to marketing and SEO and a bunch of market research. I wish they'd gone with the name Final Fantasy Online, and we just kind of like in hindsight, because he is right. Like when we start talking about like Final Fantasy 23 is coming out, it's going to be weird that if there are still people playing Final Fantasy 14, because from a new player standpoint, you're playing Final Fantasy 23. You're like, I wish I had like more of an ongoing universe. And like, well, if you tried playing 14, that sounds so old.
Yeah.
And so the number is going to age it. I'm not saying you have to go like totally nuts with the numbers in general and just toss them. There's something nice about the core ones being numbered. And so if something can be numbered, I think that's really nice. It was weird that Xbox went to 360 and then to 1 and then to 1S and then 1X and then series. And then it's like, I don't know what they're doing. So it's nice for it to have a numbering system when it makes sense. I think PlayStation does a good job with that. But Final Fantasy Online is a drastically different experience than the numbered one. So just like Tactics, I think it would have been better if this was not core numbered. But that decision's already made. So how do you give up the SEO rank? How do you give up?
Oh yeah,
you don't want to give that up. Recognition.
You don't want to give it up. Final Fantasy 14 New Genesis, please no. All right, guys, that's our show today. Thank you for everybody who joined in. Thanks also that we were able to get the chat linked up between Twitch and YouTube, so makes it easier for me as I'm managing the show to highlight y'all's comments. So thank you so much for being a part of this experiment that we call Work to Game. We're going to return you guys to your normal programming over on Twitch, where Chris is continuing his Deep Dungeon runs. As a note, Chris, the one thing that did change as a part of this is the title and the category. So when you take back over, just update your title and your category and you'll be ready to rock and roll.
Weird.
What? What? All right, guys, I'm gonna hit end broadcast, and I should then just be over on the Twitch side for just a minute. And thanks everybody on the YouTube side for the likes and for the comments, and we will see you in the next live show. Bye.